Before castles crowned the hills, before church bells rolled across the valleys, before Britain called itself united, there were giants. Great creatures that were said to be the original inhabitants of these lands, but not merely creatures of bone and hunger, but vast shapes against the skyline. They were said to stride across the moors in the half-light, lift boulders as if they were pebbles, and carve dwellings into cliffs where the sea struck hardest. And in medieval Cornwall, the land itself feels older than memory. Granite tors rise like broken teeth from the earth, hard and misshapen, not unlike the giants of this tale. A wind blowing low and constant, wailing through the crevices of those heaps of rock. The sea crashes against black rock with the patience of eternity, but nothing is eternal. They said giants once ruled the lands and indeed the coasts, before kings claimed dominion, before saints planted crosses, before druids and pagans carved Pictish stones, before Mother Earth herself. Enormous figures walked openly beneath the sky, heads poking above the tallest clouds. Some were scholars, poets, learned beings. And then there were those that were brutish and cruel, remnants of something ancient, beings tied to stone, storm and earth. Once driven underground by the first men from a faraway land, now there was a resurgence. Farmers spoke about them in lowered voices, paranoid about being heard. Fishermen had begun to sail on certain nights. Mothers warned young children not to travel too far beyond the hedgerows when the mist rolls in thick from the sea, because there were places where the land once more belonged to older, larger things. And yet from a very ordinary cottage, from a very ordinary part of the world, came someone. He was not a knight in shining armour. He was not a burly warrior with the strength of 50 men. He wasn't a prince destined by prophecy, nor a champion marked by the stars. He was just a farmer's boy, small in stature, quick in thought. The only armour he possessed was his nerve, but in times where people had none, nerve seemed like steel. He had no sword that he could carry, just a shovel and a pickaxe. He had no title, no lineage, no blessing from a king. But he possessed something that the average person did not, which was courage. And he also possessed something that the giants did not, which was something of a sharp mind. This boy was called Jack, and he decided he wanted his lands back. He wanted the people of the lands to be free from the grip of terror. Where people saw terror towering above them, Jack saw weakness hidden beneath weight. Where others trembled at size, Jack measured distance. There were things in the world that were so big, so vast that it seemed pointless to take them on. Jack saw with scale just more opportunities to find weak points. Jack would not see a great shadow fall over these lands forever. It would be giants that would fall. These beings were as immovable as the cliffs themselves, and even if they were, well, even cliffs erode over time. This is not just a story about a boy who slew monsters. It is a story of Britain changing, of old powers retreating, of wit rising where brute force once ruled. Because if giants now walk the shores, plague the people of Britain with impunity, then someone had to stand against them, and his name was Jack. Off the coast of Penzance Beach was a tidal island. Connected to the land by a vast granite causeway, it was said a giant lived there, and he had lived there for a long time. Long before chapel stones were laid, long before a bell was ever rung on this mount. He had lived there long before men called this part of the world Cornwall. A local fisherman, desperate for food, dared to walk along that coastline on a cold winter morning. The beach was littered with bones, a menagerie of animal and human alike, discarded like unwanted scraps. The fisherman almost couldn't face walking through this maritime graveyard when he spotted someone. It was a boy, a peasant's boy. A donkey was tethered to a nearby dune, but he didn't look like anyone he recognised from the village. A piece of grass poked out of the side of the boy's mouth. He held a pickaxe over his shoulder and he was staring defiantly at St. Michael's Mount. It rose from the sea like the spine of some ancient leviathan. The fisherman could scant believe what he was looking at. Did this foolish boy not know what lay across the sea? "Boy! Say boy! Can you hear me? I don't really want to shout louder than I already am." The boy did not turn around, but he replied nonetheless. I can hear you. Is it true what lives out on that island? Is that where Comoran dwells?" The fisherman gasped. He immediately looked at the mount, as if expecting something terrible to immediately emerge at the utterance of that word, that name. "Boy, you will curse us all. Do not speak such names. Do you not see what is littered around you? Do you not know what lives over there?" This time the boy did turn around. He had a tanned face and tanned forearms, a farmer's boy. He wore basic garments, enough to keep the elements off him, but that was it. The boy looked young, but there was a steeliness in that face, like a coiled spring desperate to be released. He regarded the man with equal parts sadness and equal parts disappointment. "I know what lives there. That's why I'm here. For the reward?" The fisherman was in complete disbelief. It was madness to have put out that reward. No one had dared come forward and claim it, yet here was this slip of a lad. "Over yonder is a giant. He is not merely large, he's ancient. His skin is grey as storm rock. His eyes burn like coals half buried in ash. I seen him wade into the sea, and the waves would part around him, as if obeying him. At night when that tide comes in and the mount becomes an island, we bar the doors, for that's when that thing hungers. At first it was just cattle, then sheep, then it was us, people." Jack scanned the beach. Bones were crushed into the sand. Pockets of sand higher up were stained red. Jack had never seen Comoran, but he had seen giants. He knew what they were capable of, but where others saw a monster too vast a challenge, Jack saw something else. Weight, mass, and gravity. "Not only am I going to get rid of your giant, but I will do so with just two things." Jack first tapped on that rusted iron of the pickaxe, then he tapped on the side of his head. "All I need is 1 week, and from what I can see on this beach, I would say he has ate well. That should buy me some time, because these things are never satisfied for too long. They always want more, no matter how much you think you can allow." So Jack dug. By lantern light and by salted wind, he hollowed out a pit near the path the giant took when he came down from that mount. Day after day he laboured in silence. Occasionally he looked towards the mount, and occasionally he looked behind him. Each day more and more of the locals came to watch this spectacle. He swung the pickaxe over and over again, deepening that wound in the earth. On the last day he fastened a rope around him and asked some of the men to hold the other end. They lowered him in and he dug some more, and then at last it was finished. They hoisted him out. He covered this pit with timber and turf. He even threw bones over the top, and it seemed no different from the ground around it. Jack was beginning to wonder if this giant would ever emerge again. Finding a ram's bone, he fashioned a horn. Dusk was settling in, and it looked like a moonless night await. With night descending like black angel dust and a low tide, he looked out across the sea. The mount loomed black against the sky. Jack stepped onto the causeway and raised the horn to his lips. He pulled in as much air into his lungs as possible, and then blew as hard as he could. The sound that tore across the waves, unnatural in this quiet setting, was not brave. Sleeping seagulls flew into the air. The local villagers scattered frantically at this suicidal act. The sound was not brave or steady, but it was challenging, and it was enough. From the darkness, the horn was replied to with a roar. Not the roar of an animal or some great sea devil, something older. from the memory of a world before men tilled the land. The beach shuddered. Comoran emerged from the mount and looked out across the beach. He strode forward, each step cracking the granite beneath his heel. As he got closer, his shadow swallowed Jack whole. His large, misshapen head was enveloped in matted hair, not unlike that of a lion. In the centre of his face was a lump. It was difficult to see what was warts and what was nose. He had broken teeth and his breath stank of rot and brine. "You!" the giant rumbled, a voice thick as grinding boulders. "I will grind your bones into salt." Jack stood his ground defiantly. He blew the horn again and turned tail. The enraged giant charged off the causeway and onto the beach. The earth shook. The sea churned. But the mount appeared to groan, as if it knew what was coming. The little boy was fast, but the giant was nearly upon him. 1 step, 2, 3, and then the world broke open. Timber and bones snapped. The turf collapsed. The giant tried to gain purchase, but his mass just made things worse. He fell through into the pit with a sound like a cliff face shearing into the sea. The fall did not kill him. He was stunned and confused. Jack had dug deep, but the giant's head came above the surface. His arms were pinned inside the pit. He bellowed with rage and tried to expand himself. Given time, this ogre may have surely freed himself with stupid strength alone. Jack stepped to the edge. For a moment they looked at one another. The ancients and the young. The age of giants and the age of men. Jack stood there holding the pickaxe in both hands. "It took me an entire week to dig that pit for you. It was hard going, but it did give me plenty of practice." The dumb giant frowned at first, then his eyes opened in terror. Jack lifted the pickaxe above his head and brought it down, again and again and again. There was much roaring, and Jack did not stop until the giant's cries had ceased. By that time it was dawn. The tide crept back across the sand as though nothing had changed. The villagers found Jack standing at the edge of the pit, panting. Salt wind in his hair, covered in giant's gore. The age of terror had ended and the age of stories had begun. Word of Comoran's demise travelled far across moor and marsh, through market towns and monastery cloisters. Fear was embedded in the psyche of the people, but something new was stirring. Hope. And hope has a way of awakening old hungers. In a forest thick with yew and ash, where light cannot penetrate the canopy, stood a castle of black stone. A castle with no banner, no chapel bell, no lord sworn to crown or kingdom. It belonged to Blunderbore, the two-headed giant. It was said that one head was cruel and cunning, and the other one was slow and wrathful. One always watched while the other slept. And for those wanderers who traversed the forest and came across that castle, all disappeared. Knights riding bold and bright were never seen again. Pilgrims vanished from the road. Birdsong was strangely silent amongst the trees. But Blunderbore did not dwell alone. He had a brother named Rebecks. If Blunderbore was appetite given shape, then Rebecks was the personification of brutal ruin. A giant broad as an oak with a voice like a felled tree. Where Blunderbore schemed, Rebecks rampaged. And together they hunted and together they feasted. And one day a boy entered the forest on a mule. A boy in new clothes, a saddle pack festooned with food, water and a rope. Jack came to the forest and it was not by chance. 2 days prior, Jack had encountered a ragged man, a dying man. A scrawny man allowed to leave. His last breath spoke of cages swinging from thick chains, of a hall that stank of carnage, littered with grimy bones, of a knight in one of those cages, hanging over smoking lumps of wood, curing. Jack whistled as he trotted through this tired forest. He tethered the mule to a tree on the outskirts and looped the rope around his shoulder. He sat on the grass and began to eat an apple. It would be dark soon, and even giants must sleep. Dusk came and smoke rose from the castle chimneys, thick and oily. Laughter echoed out of that smoke. When night fully descended, Jack crept to the walls. The gate was barred and the stone too sheer to climb. But castles, like old monsters, have weaknesses. Jack found the drainage culvert, a narrow channel slick with filth and human detritus. Without hesitation, he slid into dark and crawled through. The stench was suffocating, but it was nothing compared to what Jack had in mind. The silence inside was worse. He emerged into the undercroft, a vast chamber beneath the castle hall. Chains hung from the ceiling. Some held partial skeletons. Some held men. Many were dead or on the brink of death. There was one man, cleaner than the others, better put together but defeated nonetheless. The knight. His strength almost looked spent. Jack threw the apple core at the knight with clean precision. The knight snapped awake and looked down. "Asleep?" Jack whispered. The knight nodded. Jack pointed up. The knight nodded once more. Jack put one finger to his lips, and before waiting for a response, he made for the stairwell. Huge heavy footsteps could be heard above, beams of wood strained. A deep murmur pushed through the stone. Jack paused. When the murmur stopped, he climbed the stairs. In that great hall, torchlight flickered across the face tapestries. Clean rectangles highlighted on the wall where once a canvas had sat. One painting had been lazily covered in a large cloth. Jack whipped this cloth down. Blunderbore sat slumped in a massive chair carved from oak. One head lolled, drooling with eyes closed. The other head gazed into the hearth, half awake. Rebecks lay sprawled near the fire like a great dishevelled bear. His snoring was loud. Jack tiptoed through the shadows. He moved around the back of the great chair and uncoiled the rope in smooth fashion. He quickly fastened the rope around Blunderbore's ankles and bound tight. The waking head stirred. Its eyes shifted down and met Jack's. For a heartbeat, neither moved. Perhaps the giant considered he was dreaming. His senses returned to him and he went to rise. Jack threw the large cloth over those two heads and leapt back. Blunderbore surged to his feet, or tried to. Tangled and blinded, he immediately crashed forward. Rebecks jolted awake, confused and furious. Rebecks got to his feet and then collided with his brother, who was also attempting to stand up. Three heads arguing, two giants stumbling. Blunderbore found the chair blindly and swung it, only for it to smash into 100 pieces into the side of Rebecks. The hall trembled. Jack seized the moment. Jack had spied a sword on the floor where the chair had been, the knight's. Blunderbore was on his knees and pulled the cloth off his two heads, but it was too late. Jack had sprinted up his back, and with every ounce of strength, he struck once, twice. Blunderbore's body flopped forward as his two heads tumbled into the floor. Rebecks roared in grief. The sound shook the dust in the room itself. Picking up a piece of broken chair, he charged this interloper. Giants are powerful, but power combined with rage is often clumsy. Jack darted around the pillars as this foul beast smashed through hall. Timber splintered and flame leapt from fallen torches. In his fury, he slipped on the blood of his brother. He hung in the air momentarily and crashed to the floor. Jack did not hesitate. He ran forward. Rebecks sat up. His head looked around and all he saw was a flash of steel. The body fell backwards again and the head pinwheeled off into a corner. When dawn hung over the forest, it showed a broken castle. The gates were now open. Jack, tired and stinking, walked out across that drawbridge. The chain knight free, one arm around Jack's to keep steady. The black smoke that once choked the treetops thinned into the morning mist, and for the first time in years, light petaled through the tree cover. Something was now different. These giants had captured, ruled, taken what they wanted with arrogance and impunity. They'd tried to make their own kingdom, and Jack had just torn it down. The age of giants, however, would not end quietly. Jack rode into Camelot, and his reputation preceded him. He was the talk of the land, not just in markets, but halls now. Not amongst farmers, but amongst knights. The banners of King Arthur hung high above the court, crimson and gold, heavy with memory. The round table gleamed beneath the torchlight, its circle unbroken, its seats filled with names that would outlive stone itself. Jack left his horse at the stables and walked into that hall. Not tall, not crowned, and not armoured in splendour, but carrying the quiet gravity of someone who had seen monsters fall. He was now adorned in a red and white cloak. The court did not greet him warmly. Some of the knights only saw a peasant who had been lucky. Others saw something dangerous, a reminder that one did not have to be born into greatness. Arthur leaned forward on his throne and watched Jack with silent intrigue. Beside the king stood his son, young and fierce, eager for glory. The prince had heard the rumours. Anything this peasant could do, he could do tenfold. It would be him the people would talk about. "I hear they call you Jack the Giant Killer now. What say you, boy?" cried the prince. Jack looked at the prince. He didn't look much older than himself. He did not respond. "Well, you don't look much to us. Perhaps you're merely good at spreading stories. We do need a new court jester," declared the prince to the room. Laughter came around Jack. "Aye, perhaps you do. Mayhap when you find your new jester, he can tell the story of the two-headed giant not 3 leagues behind me. I tricked him into cutting open his own belly, and I left him there. Mayhap he is still trying to push his guts back in. I wonder though, had I not come this way, what would you have done when he reached here? I do not see a jester that would have tricked him." The room erupted into commotion. The atmosphere bristled. It was then that news came like a storm wind through the hall. A messenger approached, kneeling before his king. "Sire, a great and terrible beast lies to the north, a 3-headed giant. They say one head can breathe fire, the second head spitting black venom. The third head was like that of a piercing shriek, enough to shatter wooden forts or the bones of men. I have seen the villages, blackened, charred, poisoned rivers, pastures turned to ash. We took a battalion, but they are all lost." This time the commotion was replaced with silence, stunned silence. The prince stepped forward. "I will slay it. Give me the knights of the round and we will vanquish this beast." Arthur's gaze lingered on Jack. All eyes were now on Jack. The king spoke. "You have faced what others feared." The king spoke with gravitas. "Ride with my son." They rode north and found the giant at twilight, half asleep against a crop of blackened, petrified trees. Neither party had time to prepare. The giant rose, vast and terrible, 6 eyes upon them. The prince charged, brave, bright, but untested. His lance struck true into a thigh and shattered in half. A sonic shriek answered him. If not for the splendid armour, prince and horse would surely have been obliterated. Nonetheless, they were thrown to one side. Jack saw what the prince could not. Strength and force would fail. He dragged the prince from the shriek of the giant as another hit the horse, which was then no more. The first head opened its mouth and corrosive black liquid shot out. Jack rolled to one side as a dead tree was liquefied. The middle head shrieked into the sky. It was like a thunderclap at ground level. The third head unleashed hellfire. Jack did not roar back, nor did he boast or pontificate. He watched. 3 terrible heads, but they argued. They struck with ego and fury, not coordinated, and in that discord lay this giant's weakness. The venomous head drew back, neck stretched thin. Jack picked up the prince's fallen sword, a magnificent weapon, beautiful but untested. It was not dimmed with battle. He waited, heart steady, venom, shriek, flame, then steel. He leapt between the motions. After the firehead had finished, the venomous head drew back, but Jack was already underneath. He stood firm and thrust the sword up. It pushed through the soft underside of the jaw, and black blood shot out like a geyser. The giant convulsed. The prince, dumbfounded at first, had finally seen what Jack was doing. As the shrieking head looked down at Jack, the prince threw an ornamental dagger with all his might at the firehead. It struck true and the firehead flopped dead. The giant staggered back, incredulous at what was happening. The prince came in next to Jack. "Now then, my liege, what shall we do with this sorry excuse of a giant?"
"Wait,"
bellowed the giant.
"Spare me, young sires, and I shall reward you greatly."
The giant loped over to a cleft of stones and, using his remaining strength, pushed them over. In a hole in the ground, he retrieved a sack and tossed it to the men.
"Treasure!"
shouted the giant, hoping this would assuage his would-be killers. The prince's eyes opened in astonishment. "These are not mere trinkets, Jack. They are older than Camelot itself." Jack lifted the blade first. It was unlike any he had held, huge but light, perfectly balanced, etched with runes. The magic sword. Beside it rested a small plain cap of deep red cloth. When Jack touched it, knowledge flooded him. Not voices, but understanding, epiphany, patterns and intent, truth. He looked at the giant momentarily. The cap of knowledge. A cloak lay folded nearby, dark as a raven's wings. When Jack draped it across his shoulders, most of his body and legs vanished. All the prince could make out was Jack's head and boots. The cloak of invisibility. And finally, a pair of slender shoes, silver-threaded and impossibly light. When he laced them on, he looked around. Everything seemed to slow down. The blood dripping from the dead head seemed to hang in mid-air. His breath steadier, his limbs swifter than thought. The shoes of swiftness. The prince saw Jack now, replete with this mythical war gear. He looked at him different, not as an upstart or a rival, as something necessary. Jack looked at the giant. "And no more trouble from you?"
"No, young sire."
"The thing is, I looked into your heart when I wore the cap, and well, better to be on the safe side." Jack asked for a dagger from the prince. When they returned to Camelot, 2 heads were borne behind them. Arthur rose from his seat. He did not praise loudly, he did not proclaim. Instead, he regarded Jack with measured eyes. "You walked into the giant's shadow. Britain changes, and so must those who defend her. I see just two heads. Is the giant vanquished? Nay, my lord, but he won't trouble us any longer. Jack pulled something out of the sack and threw it onto the cobbled stone. It landed with a wet slap. Large and meaty, it stank. The tongue of the middle head. A place at the round table was offered, not because Jack was born noble, but because he had proven something greater. The boy who dug pits in Cornwall now carried relics of an age before knights. And though the hall celebrated, somewhere beyond its walls, darker things stirred. For power, once claimed, rarely went unnoticed. Camelot did not sleep easily after the defeat of the three-headed giant. For when ancient beasts are vanquished, something always takes notice. It began with the lady. She arrived in court veiled in black, her hair a silvery grey that betrayed her youthful years, a face pale as winter dawn. No herald announced her, no horse hooves were heard. She simply stood within that hall like a dark hourglass. The torches dimmed when she entered. The prince cried out as this lady was to be betrothed to him, but there was something not quite right. A glamour had been placed on her, something twisted hiding the beauty as her veil did that white face. The round table seemed to shrink. She did not bow to Arthur or his son. She did not look at the knights. Her eyes found Jack. She finally spoke. Her honeyed voice drifted to Jack. There are giants you have slain, giants you have humbled, but there is a greater adversary who waits beyond the flesh. Her arms moved like two snakes, palms down and rhythmically supinating, as she beckoned this slayer of giants to her. Jack felt no warmth emanating from her, something more animalistic. She spoke of a chapel, long abandoned on the edge of a blasted heath, a place where the veil between the worlds had grown thin. A presence manifested itself there. No beast or giant, a will. Arthur made no command of his knights. Her gaze made it clear. This was for Jack alone. And then suddenly the hall was gone, and Jack was there, in the chapel, dark and cold. No wind, no sound of birds. The air itself seemed hesitant. The surroundings were ruined. Broken charred pews, broken windows, an inverted cross hung broken. And there she was, in that doorway. Only now she was not veiled, nor was she wearing anything. Her beauty was unbearable, not subtle but radiant like a blade. Her eyes shone with something that almost made them seem impossibly white. You have done well, little killer of giants, she cooed. A dark tongue wormed out of her mouth and licked around her neck like an unsatiated snake. Jack felt revulsion and desire at once. But tell me, why do you fight? Jack did not answer, and then suddenly it became icy cold, and then steps interrupted the pair from behind him. From behind the altar came a figure, seeming more shadow than substance, tall, wrapped in a cloak of darkness, moving like smoke. Not horned or monstrous, beautiful, terrible, Lucifer, the morning star fallen, pride given voice. The ground cracked where he walked. You have gifted much, Lucifer said, sounding amused. He walked around Jack. Strength not your own, artifacts older than your king, knowledge you barely comprehend. His eyes lingered on Jack's sword. Those do not belong to you. The broken chapel trembled. A hole in the roof showed clouds unnaturally spiralling inward. The lady held her mouth to her lips as she repressed laughter. But Jack saw everything. Nothing more than an orchestration. Temptation first, revelation second. Nothing more than cheap parlour tricks. The cap of knowledge nagged to be placed on head. When he did, the world altered. He saw not merely the forms before him, but patterns, threads of intention, reality being bent inward into a dreamlike state, an architecture of deception. The lady was no captive, she was the lure. Lucifer would not strike first, he would invite surrender. Lay down your sword. You have fought chaos and I offer you order. Power beyond kings. The fairest maiden in the land that will fulfill your every dream. Kneel and Britain will be remade through you. And for a moment, Jack saw. Cities gleaming, giants erased from memory, his name etched in eternity. But the cap revealed more. Jack atop a throne, apathetic, adorned in baubles and heavy chains. Golden, yes, but chains nonetheless. Temptation indeed. The devil did not need Jack to answer. He saw this boy would never yield. The sky above tore open in white fire and a terrible beam came down. Jack was blown off his feet, crashing into discarded furniture. He picked himself up. He felt blinded. He pulled the cloak of invisibility around him and vanished. Lucifer shifted for a moment. Invisibility is not absence, only concealment. He focused his preternatural senses, but Jack was moving, the shoes of swiftness carrying him faster than thought, circling wide. The lady appeared frozen in shock, as did Lucifer, but he was turning slowly. Somehow he was tracking Jack's movements. The magical sword in Jack's hands began to hum. Lucifer's clawed hands closed into fists and the ground split open mere moments where Jack's running feet had been. Too slow. Jack got behind the great adversary, the cloak whirling as Jack swung in a circle. The blade bit, but it was unlike anything he had imagined. It did not cut flesh, it appeared to cut light. A scream tore through that chapel, not rage but shock. Where a wound would be exiting blood, instead brilliant white beams came out. Lucifer staggered, his form flickering like a dying star. The lady lunged at Jack, her beauty twisted, her skin a vivid red, radiant mask peeling into something venomous. Jack gazed on her and the cap revealed all. Not a woman or even a demon, but temptation personified. But Jack knew something that Lucifer did not. On the way back to the court, the young prince had excitedly told him of the woman he would one day marry, every detail including her name. Jack uttered it and she faltered. Lucifer roared and great thunderbolts came out of the sky, stabbing at the ground all around them. But Jack was already moving. He leapt, the shoes flashing silver, and so did the sword. The blade drove downwards through the grey enemy's manifested form. Light erupted, but it was not hellfire, something purer and cleansing. The chapel stone shattered, the inverted cross burst into flame, and then the light was gone. The chapel silent. Lucifer was gone, not destroyed but cast back. And then the chapel was. Jack was back in the court, on bended knee with the lady in his arms, her radiance dimmed, restored to mortality again, trembling but freed. Her hair now was a youthful black. She looked at Jack, not with seduction, but with awe and gratitude. The lady remained at court and took to the side of her would-be husband. Jack took his place at the round table. Not because he was strongest, but because he couldn't be owned. By the time Jack rode north again, Britain was changing. Chapel's rows where standing stones once marked the hills. Jack was becoming deeply entrenched across the land as a legend. Many a giant had been slain, and yet there lay a deep fortress carved into a black cliffside. There lay a giant, perhaps the strongest of them all. He was not merely large and strong, but commanded an older craft, one woven from oak groves and blood rites, whispered names not spoken in church. A giant among giants. Heathens whispered that he was there at the beginning, when the Allfather Woden did battle with giants for control of the world. Others say he played a part in the creation of that great stone circle on the Salisbury Plains. His power did not lie in strength of limb, but in transformation. When Jack came across his domain, the air shimmered strangely. A grove lay between Jack and fortress where birds circled in silence. Jack rode through this grove, now mounted on the finest steed in Camelot. He encountered several animals within that grove, but they were not dumb beasts. A sheep bleat softly, a deer with human sorrow in its eyes, a hound that watched with too much awareness. The cap of knowledge made it clear. They were not simply animals grouped together, they were captives, transformed. The voice of Galligantus spoke. In front of Jack, behind him, above and beyond. The voice came from nowhere, yet was everywhere.
Little priest, do you know what your kind did? We were here before gods, before angels, before men. The lands were at peace. We were at peace. Do you know what the race of men did to us? What I will do to all the sons and daughters of Cain.
The cat projected and saw something beyond the grove. A path. A gate leading to the fortress, and something is rushing out of the gate. A two-headed giant. Different. Each head sports just one eye. Heads bald as stone, with a great horn protruding from the forehead of each. The lower part of this beast was like that of a two-legged oak. It was coming, brandishing a huge club. Jack had to pull the cap off quickly.
Fee, fi, fo, fum. I smell the blood of an Englishman.
Galligantus' laughter surrounded the grove as Thunderall came through the trees, intent on smashing this killer of giants. The sky blackened above as the horns of Thunderall acted as a conductor. Strange runes and symbols were carved into his flesh, which seemed to glow as electricity gathered around those horns.
You carry the sword of a new age, Englishman. Do you think your god has slain mine?
Thunderell was no mere brute. He was belief made flesh. The last echo of sky worship. He skidded to a halt not more than 20 meters from Jack. Lightning arcs flew at Jack from those terrible heads, hitting rock, tree and ground indiscriminately. Jack was forced back as lightning tore at the ground like a whip. Jack donned the cloak of invisibility, and Galligantus laughed once more.
You can no more hide from the storm than a wind can.
Jack ran behind the thickest tree and laced tight the shoes of swiftness, whilst pulling on the cap of knowledge. He ran, faster than anything living ever could. He ran not at the giant, but around him, and the storm did not seem chaotic. Even the lightning whipping around him was being done with precision. Only the ferocity made it seem without reason. Thunderall was not so much summoning the storm as he was acting as its conductor. Jack saw gaps between each charge. Then he moved. Not away, but towards. Faster than thought. faster than lightning. Shoes flashing, time itself sparked off the heels, cloak snapping behind him. He darted towards Thunderel faster than he could pivot and propelled himself upward. Jack seemed to hang in mid-air. A bolt of lightning descended. Jack drove the magic sword into one of the horns. Steel met energy and the entire world turned white for a moment. Jack landed. Pure ethereal energy was steaming off the sword. Thunderel was still there, but he had petrified into blackened carbon. And then he collapsed in on himself into pure ash. If Thunderel was storm, then Galligantus was shadow. He did not rage against the new order, he withdrew from it. Within the hall of Galligantus, candles burned green instead of gold. Symbols carved into stone, not Christian, not pagan, something before. The giant sat upon a throne of roots and bone, his beard braided with charms.
So, the king's little correction.
Jack did not answer and let the cloak fall over him. Galligantus smiled and snapped his fingers. The shockwave took Jack off his feet and he assumed visibility once more.
Do you think your items are a match for me?
The green candles flared violently, stretching unnaturally long. The air thickened. Tendrils of roots came up between the crevices of the stone slabs, grasping at Jack's boots. The shoes of swiftness carried him clear. Galligantus stood up and clapped his hands together. The impact of those fleshy palms created a sonic boom that threw Jack backward.
I am power incarnate.
Jack sheathed the sword and donned the cap. Galligantus was not drawing power from himself. It was bound in the fortress itself. To old symbols, to a time from before. Mayhap he was power incarnate while he remained in this fortress. Destroy the sorcery, not the sorcerer. Jack ran again. This time he evaded the sonic claps. He ran past the candles, extinguishing them in his wake. With the hall now darkened, he used the sword crudely, smashing apart walls adorned with runes, cleaving pillars in two. Galligantus appeared to grow larger, filling the room with his immense presence.
You erase memory.
No, said Jack. I erase tyranny. Galligantus hurled a curse at Jack in a language long since forgotten. The son of a farmer felt his limbs go heavy, his vision blur. He was being transformed. The cap burned cold into his thoughts. He had to act fast, think fast. The cap translated the ancient curse. Jack spoke a counterspell, in the giant's language, the true name of the spell. Galligantus faltered, and that was all Jack needed. He sprinted forward and drove the sword into the heart of the giant. He did not stop until his hilt met flesh. Galligantus did not die in spectacular fashion. He stumbled. He fell to one knee and slumped. Solid, mortal, dead. The fortress itself began to shake. Jack tore out of that fortress as fast as the shoes could carry him. When he turned back, the entire structure was collapsing in on itself. The cap told him that something called a singularity was occurring, and then the fortress was gone. Silence for a moment, and then the air rushed back in to fill the vacuum left behind. Destroy the sorcery, not the sorcerer. The animals came out of the edge of the grove. The deer was transforming into a knight, the hound a lady, the sheep a duke's daughter, and where once there was a fortress was merely a cliff face now. For the first time in a long time, Britain appeared to exhale. By the time Jack returned south, the giants were gone. The storms had abated, the runes were dust, the old gods no longer walked in flesh, and Jack, farmer's son, giant slayer, foil to Lucifer and breaker of sorcery, stood at the hinge of ages. The age of giants had finally ended, and the age of men, with all its frailty, faith and fragile hope, had finally begun. And so in time, the giants were gone. Gone from the coasts of Cornwall, gone from Wales, gone from Britain. Britain had changed. Not from the departure of giants, but the people were beginning to believe in something different. Faith traded for another, fear traded for hope. Church bells replacing those old war horns on the wind. Standing stones becoming part of the scenery. Where fear had once ruled the countryside, villages grew and fields widened beneath the plough. And Jack, the farmer's son who began his life with nothing but his heart and mind, found himself standing in a place no one would have imagined. Jack represents the young ushering in the new order, replacing the old. In Camelot, King Arthur kept his word. Everyone gathered at court, banners heave above the round table. Jack was now Sir Jack, a knight, not of noble birth, but for deeds that had reshaped the land itself. The giants, that great scourge, were gone because of him. Even those dark powers, those whispered about in monasteries, plotting and pulling strings in the background, had been driven by his hand. And that duke's daughter was now married to Sir Jack, a union that would once have seemed impossible for a boy born in a Cornish cottage. The wedding was said to be grand beyond measure. Knights of the Round Table stood witness. Jack was loved by the people far and wide. Arthur raised his cup, and the land that had once trembled beneath the footsteps of giants now celebrated the courage of the boy who was now a man. Jack never forgot where he came from. Though he wore armour now and bore a knight's title, he was still that same lad who had once stood alone before creatures larger than houses and refused to step aside. In the years that followed, he served the king faithfully. Afterwards, some say he travelled still, hunting the last of strange things lingering on the edges of Britain. Others say he remained at Camelot. Whatever is known, Jack got his happily ever after. He proved that with determination, willpower and a little courage, anything is impossible. When things seem insurmountable, impossible and hopeless, know there is always a way to overcome. Jack was the symbol of a changing world. Thank you for listening today. If you like this story, please leave a like and review. It helps others find their way back to the world of men. And so, while the story of Jack the Giant Killer comes to its end, it does not mark the end of the telling of Arthurian lore. And while Jack's story feels like the closing of one age, he cleared the ground for something new, because as giants fell, another story began to rise. A story not of brute strength but of prophecy, not pits and swords but of magic, destiny and the shaping of a kingdom. Perhaps the greatest kingdom of them all. Behind the throne of King Arthur stood a figure more mysterious than any giant Jack ever faced. A man said to see the future. A man whispered to be half mortal, half something else. There are those that say he came from the primordial cosmos itself, or the last remnant of something ancient, no longer father of all. A man who could move kings and kingdoms like pieces on a chessboard. Merlin. If Jack represents the moment when the old Britain ended, then Merlin represents the birth of the Britain that followed. In our next episode of Mythic Albion, we begin the second part of this Arthurian trilogy, the story of the wizard, the prophet, the true power behind Camelot itself. Because before there was a king, there was Merlin. and his story is stranger than any giant's. So walk wisely and beware the tremble of giant footsteps from out yonder.